It is clear from biblical tradition that, at the beginning of their history, the semi-nomadic Hebrews, with flocks of sheep and goats, were at the point of moving into a settled way of life. The patriarchs or chiefs of large families, or clans living, for the most part, in peace among their neighbors with whom they encountered covenants. From family and clan beginnings came tribes linked to one another by ancestral blood ties. With Abraham, the story of the Hebrews begins, and it is clearly stated that Hebrew origins lay outside Canaan. The summons to leave his ancestral home and journey to Canaan is accompanied by a promise presented in the Old Testament. From the time of Abraham down to Jacob, Canaan was a land of independent city-states like Shechem, Jerusalem, and Gerar. These population centers were sustained by pastures frequented by local herdsmen and visitors like Abraham and his descendants. Efforts to date the patriarchal period have not been particularly rewarding, for biblical chronology is complex. 215 years passed between the time of Abraham's journey to Canaan and Jacob's migration to Egypt, and the period spent in Egypt is given as 430 years.
Exodus chapter 12, verse 40. Now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years,
making a total of 645 years before the Exodus. As we shall see, most scholars date the Exodus near the middle of the 13th century, so that Abraham would leave Mesopotamia at the beginning of the 19th century, and Jacob's journey to Egypt would occur at about 1700 BC. The early 19th century date for Abraham places his departure from Mesopotamia at the time of the Elamite and Amorite invasion. It harmonizes with the conclusions of Nelson Glueck, who found that between the 21st and 19th centuries BC, the Negev was dotted with hamlets where inhabitants, having learned how to hoard water, engaged in agriculture and tended small flocks. Such settlements would provide stopping places for Abraham and his descendants. The 17th century date for Jacob's settlement in Egypt coincides with the Hyksos invasion of Egypt, lending support to Joseph's hypothesis for Hebrews may have been part of this movement. The second pattern of dating would place Abraham in the time of Hammurabi of Babylon, and would give strength to the argument that the mention of King Amraphel of Shinar in Genesis 14:1 is a Hebraized reference to Hammurabi. Abraham would, therefore, be in Canaan during the Hyksos period, and Joseph would have risen to the power in the Amarna stage. The close of the Amarna period brought to power leaders hostile to Akhenaten, and possibly also to those he had favored. In Egypt, the enslaved Hebrews labored to build cities such as Ramesses and Pithom. One view is that this took place under Ramesses II. Another view is that the Exodus took place around 1446 BC. Archaeology reveals that Ramesses included chariotry stables. During the Exodus from God led the Hebrews not by the nearby northern route to Canaan, which was infested with Egyptian military stations, but by Mount Sinai, which was safely south of Egyptian control.
Exodus chapter 13, verses 17 and 18. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near, for God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt.
The Memphrath stele dates to the late 13th century BC and memorizes Pharaoh Memphrath's victories against Libya and Canaan on this grand stele. Outside the Bible, this is the earliest reference to Israel to date. Israel is laid waste, its seed is not. Furthermore, by 1209 BC, tribal Israel was already in Canaan. Extra biblical proof for this is found on Pharaoh Memphrath's victory stele. The Memphrath stele was discovered in 1896 by Flanders Petrie at Thebes and is currently in the Cairo Museum, Egypt. Not only is this the earliest mention of Israel, but one of the only direct mentions in Egyptian history. This coincides with the Egyptian practice of damnatio memoriae, which is a Latin phrase that means condemnation of memory, referring to the practice of erasing a figure and or their deeds from records through their destruction or concealment from the public. This was a common practice in Egyptian society. To the Egyptians, writing gave immortality to the spirit and was sacred to the society, so sacred that only elite individuals knew how to read and write. The Hebrew Exodus would be an embarrassment to the Egyptian history, which would provide logic behind the lack of artifacts, writings, and other evidence that mention this period from Egypt. Whatever the correct date for Abraham may be, he represents the beginning of the nation to the Hebrews. Perhaps the best that can be said is that the Hebrews of the Bible appear to be one branch of the Northwest Semitic group, related linguistically to Canaanites and Edomites, and who moved from a semi-nomadic existence to settled life in the Bronze Age.